Moving on to one of the most distinctive features found on the 222 is that of the hub protectors, which are found on all four of the road wheels. The 222, like many other German armored cars of the period, had these triangular plates which mounted to the existing bolts found on the hub, which protected the center spindle. It was feared by the designers that with shrapnel or with any type of other fire, that a stray bullet can damage the center spindle of the wheel, which would do a lot of damage to the drivetrain, thus knocking out the vehicle. The designers came up with these triangular plates, which again bolt to the hub using the existing fasteners which are found on the wheel itself. It was a clever design. However, I have seen pictures of 222s in period photographs, both with and without these plates fitted. More than likely, these plates were ditched in field, as more than likely getting access to the bolts via these plates is a bit of a nuisance. And so once in field, they were probably discarded. The plates that you see here are supplied with the Panzerwerk set. Here I have a spare one. They are perfectly scale and sized and mount directly to the Panzerwerk road wheel. The pieces are, again, perfect out of the box, just a minor amount of cleanup, and then they were simply painted, weathered, and mounted. Now, to make the installation go a lot smoother, because the fasteners that I used to bolt the wheels to the hub were fitted in the exact same locations of the original Panzerwerk molded-in lug nuts, the Panzerwerk plates were a direct install, and no fiddling or modification needed to have been made at all. The Panzerwerk set, each wheel comes with the triangular plates, and as you can see, all of the road wheels that are mounted to the suspension have the components fitted. The spare one that you see here was the one that came with the spare tire. However, since that tire is not mounted to any of the transmission pieces, this component here simply gets put in my spare parts bin. And here's the model shovel just prior to installation. As you can see, it's been all painted and weathered. And the shovel will now be installed to the model. As for the installation, like what was mentioned before, the latch here is fully functional. Fold it out of the way. Slide the shovel into its tool post. And then lock the handle down with the clamp. Along with the shovel, the vehicle does also have a wire clipper as well as an axe. Now, unlike most other German AFV in which these components are mounted on the outside, these two components will be mounted on the inside portion of the vehicle. As for the components themselves, the axe was from 6-scale Icons, and the clipper, I believe, was from Armor Packs. It was a leftover piece I had in my spare parts bin. The clipper itself was casted all one piece in soft white metal, and what I did was I went ahead and removed the stock molded in white metal handles and replaced those with wooden ones. Now, one thing that's unique about the German AFV clippers is that on the ends they are distinctive of having these two large domes which are found on the ends of the wooden handles. The domes themselves on the real pieces are made out of plastic. They're, I think, Bakelite. And on the model here, these are recycled from the kit original ones, which were molded to the handle. I just simply cut them off, put pins through them, and then pinned the whole thing together. The shovel itself, it's a lot smaller than what's typically found on German AFV. Typically, they have larger axes. This axe you see here is made out of wood and white metal. It is all stock. There are no mods that have been made to it. The only thing I did was went ahead and treated and weathered the handle and the axe head itself. These components now will be mounted to their appropriate locations inside the vehicle. With the tire removed, you can see the components that have been added to the interior. Here's the wire clipper. And here we can see the axe. Also added to the model is that of the jack and the jack block. Like what was mentioned in a previous video, the mounts themselves were all made out of sheet metal and were all attached to the fender. The jack itself was a resin casting that I went ahead and added the weathering, and then was simply mounted in its mounts. The block itself is fabricated out of a block of wood with metal strips, and the strip detailing was also fabricated in order to complete it to the way you see it here. On the opposite side of the fender, we have here a cable as well as a Tetra fire extinguisher. The cable itself was fabricated out of real metal cable, and after it was painted and weathered, was spooled into the mounts which were showcased earlier. The fire extinguisher itself was a resin casting from Armor Packs. This is the second unit that this vehicle has. The other unit is actually mounted on the interior portion of the vehicle. The 222 did have a very distinctive fire extinguisher, which would have been located on this fender over here. That fire extinguisher is a little bit larger than the Tetra. However, the Tetra makes for a good stand-in compared to the original unit. Here we have the spare tire, now permanently mounted to the mount. This was also discussed in a previous video, but here we can see that the tire is now fully painted, weathered from the previous scene. And here's the model's radio. The radio in this format here is now fully painted and is ready for installation. The radio, like I mentioned in an earlier video, was a resin set from panzerwerk.com. The resin component was very nicely detailed, and all of the components that you see on this component were molded in and are stock from Panzerwerk. One modification I did make was to the plug. If we could see, there are little prongs on the inside. These prongs were not supplied with the Panzerwerk set and were simply added. A small drill bit, I went ahead and drilled out the holes in the appropriate locations, and then with small sewing pins from the inside, I went ahead and glued them in with the stems protruding outward. Keep in mind the radio is a hollow component. It is a hollow box with a detail faceplate, which makes detailing the prongs very easy. Another modification that I made to the Panzerwerk radio was that of the gauges. The gauges that you see here are molded hollow and are simple punch out with some very paper thin resin that gets knocked out easily with a needle file. With the gauge being hollow, the Panzerwerk does supply you with a little insert for the gauges. These are printed on paper. Prior to installing these pieces with some clear plastic, I went ahead and cut them to approximately the size of the gauges and glued the clear plastic to the back of the faceplate. With the clear plastic installed, it mimics that of the glass lens which is found on these gauges. Once the clear plastic was mounted, the paper inserts were then mounted in their appropriate locations, completing the look of the dial and the other gauge that we have here present on the radio. Now, the Panzerwerk set also came with a water slide decal sheet for the rest of the markings. Unfortunately, the markings did not survive the water slide process. This is more than likely due to the age of the decal sheet and the environment in which the decal sheets were stored. In their place, I went ahead and with a small paintbrush added abridged markings. With the scale of the lettering and the scale of this radio, the abridged marking should be more than suffice for the detailing on hand. Now, with the radio out of the way, it can simply be mounted to the radio rack, which is mounted on the inside portion of the turret, which was discussed in an earlier project update video. And here's the radio now mounted to its mounting frame. Like I mentioned before, the frame was completed in an earlier video. As for mounting and securing the radio to the frame, this is done as per the real unit and with that of a leather strap. The leather strap that you see here is a real piece of leather strap, and the leather really helps the accuracy as well as the detail of the model. As for the wire electrical connections, this is not per the Panzerwerk set. That's facilitated with this little plug here. This plug here was not supplied with Panzerwerk and was scratch built out of pieces of styrene. The wiring comes out of the radio into this box, to which then goes up into the tank's aerial antenna base. The base that you see here is a ECA soft resin casting, and what is going to be added soon after the filming of this scene is that of the actual antenna itself, which will simply just plug into this stem right here. With the radio out of the way, I can now install the gun and mount the turret to the vehicle. For the model, I will be utilizing this Dragon MG34. The Dragon MG34 is a very nice piece. This version here is a little bit of a wreck state, and I acquired it from a eBay lot auction a number of years ago. And I finally have something now to use it on. The weapon here is pre-built. It's the pre-built version. Now, they did release this as a kit. Now, this is one of the anti-aircraft sets in which there would have been a spider sight that would have been mounted in this location here. The spider sight is missing, so I'm going to reconvert it back to just the standard MG34, which will simply just be removing of this hollow tube, which is molded in for that of a little peg. The Dragon kit is nicely detailed. It features a pivotable barrel shroud as well as a separate barrel. The model also has a functional feed cover. However, the bolt and spring are not functional. They're just one piece. Before I could go ahead and repaint the unit, I'm going to modify the receiver in that, if we could see here, the buttstock is attached to this version of the machine gun. Now, the MG34 is unique in that when this weapon would be put inside of a vehicle, due to the extra space required for the buttstock, it was a clever design in that you can remove the buttstock by pushing a little pin, rotating the stock, and removing it altogether without any tools. In order to do that, I will need to modify the Dragon set by removing the buttstock and fabricating the buffer tube assembly, which would be present when the buttstock is removed. For any of my viewers that might be confused on how the buttstock system actually works, for reference here, I actually have my real MG34. Now, as a quick side note, this is an actual firearm. This is not a airsoft replica or even a non-firing demilitarized prop. This is an actual firearm, and this firearm is semi-automatic only. It's not a true machine gun due to the laws in the United States. However, the gun itself is fabricated with almost all original components. Back to the buttstock. In order to take the buttstock off, first being a real firearm, I will go ahead and safety check. Now that the weapon is safety checked, in order to take off the buttstock, we have here this tab, which is on the bottom portion of the stock. By depressing this tab, you can now rotate the buttstock 90 degrees and remove it from the receiver of the gun. As you can see, here is the buffer, and with the buffer, with the stock removed, you can see how the overall length of the weapon is now a lot shorter. Basically, this would also, to also make this from the type that would be used on the 222, you would also need to remove the bipod, which again, there's a small little spring down here. You pull this, rotate it 90 degrees, and the bipod is removed. And now the weapon, as you see it right here, minus the sling, would be the way it would be installed in the 222 armored car. Now it's important to note, and why is this relevant, is that all of these components here, namely the buttstock and the bipod, would actually be stowed inside of the vehicle in case the machine gun would ever need to be removed from the coaxial mount, in order for it to be mounted either in case the crew needs to escape and they need a weapon for themselves, or if they need to position the weapon in a place to protect the vehicle, in a foxhole or something. So you have these components here that can quickly transform the coaxial gun into a standard GPMG MG34. And here is the machine gun now completed and ready for installation. As you can see, since the last scene, the rear buttstock has been removed off of the rear receiver, and in its place, the buffer tube assembly has been added. Now, the buffer tube is a new resin addition from EastCoastArmory.com. It simply gets mounted onto the rear portion of the receiver when you remove the buttstock. The component is fully detailed, has its locking lugs present, as well as its rear screw cap detailing, as well as lock notches. In addition to the buffer tube, the rest of the gun was also reworked. The tube that was originally molded into this portion here, which would have been the installation of the spider sight, has been deleted. In its place, a scale peg was added. The scale peg better replicates that of the real peg on the real MG34. On the front portion here, on the gun itself, there was a molded-in section for that of the bipod. Like what was shown on the real MG34, the bipod swings in this little rail section here, and when not installed, the bipod swinging component is not present. The piece was deleted, thus making for a more accurate rendition of the gun. The gun was repainted and reweathered. In addition to doing all that, I also drilled out the muzzle end of the gun as it was molded solid from Dragon. The gun still has its barrel, which is inside of its barrel jacket. The grips were painted to be that of red bakelite, which was a common material found on these weapons of the period. The feed tray is functional. And the belt grabbing mechanism is painted in silver, as is the bolt, which is true for the real MG34. Moving our way to the buttstock. The buttstock itself, like I mentioned, was removed from the gun. However, will be stowed on the interior portion of the vehicle for extra detailing. The component was modified from the kit original in that I drilled out the portion in the back, and the small little retention slot screw was added to the rear portion here of the stock. This component here was absent on the Dragon piece. On the real buttstock, this fastener here is what connects the wood, or in this case bakelite, buttstock to the buffer tube cover, which slips over the component. And here's the machine gun now mounted to the model. The gun itself locks into the mounts, which were fabricated into the gun carriage itself. Since everything was scaled up for the Dragon gun, the installation went over very smooth. Also, you can see without the buttstock how a little bit of space was saved on the interior portion of the vehicle. Another one of the final bits of detailing that was added to the model in order to complete it was the little rubber headrests that are around the rear portion here of the turret. On the real vehicle, there are several rubber pads which were bolted to the side armor plate in order to prevent anyone from dinging their head if the vehicle was to buck and your head would make contact with the side. It offers a little bit of protection, however I'm not sure if it would work a whole lot, which is why you would wear your helmet. Anyway, the pieces themselves are fabricated out of strips of styrene with small little rivet detailing added. It's kind of difficult to see in this lighting, however the components were added to all of the sides on the half back portion of the turret, and as a mirror image on the opposite side. Here we can get a better look at the rubber headrests. Again, they are a mirror image on the rear portion of the turret. As for the radio, as you can see, I went ahead and added a 1/6 scale headset as well as a throat mic, and they are detailing the interior portion of the model. Literally, the last piece of detailing that needed to have been added to the model in order to complete it was that of the gas mask canisters, which are found on the top portion here of the hull. If we recall from an earlier video, I had the mounts fabricated and added in place, and I just needed to wait for these components to come in. The components you see here are stock Dragon. They were purchased from Monkey Depot, and the parts are very highly recommended. They were simply installed to the mounts that I fabricated, and with these pieces added, the build is literally completed. This was the last component necessary. There were 2 of these gas cans needed, one on each of the top portions of the doors. as the piece is a mirror image from each other. Like I said before, with these parts added, the model itself is now completed and is ready for dioramas. And that concludes this project update video for this 1/6 scale German SDKFZ 222 armored car. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, and don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thank you.